As I always say, I'm excited, and I'm super, super excited. I would say probably more excited for this guy than anybody who's ever been on the podcast, and I hate to kind of lead in with that with him, but he's just an amazing guy. I found his book. Okay, his book is called The Talent Code. His name is Dan Coyle. He's a New York Times bestselling author. He's written a few other books. He's also a contributing writer for Outside Magazine. He's doing a bunch of different things. He's got a book coming up called The Culture Code. It's due out January 30th. You can pre-order right now. It's available everywhere, Amazon, Books A Million, and Barnes & Noble. And so he's come on today, and I'm so excited again because we were talking a little bit before about why I'm so excited, and I just have a ton of questions. I think for those of you that are listening and also watching right now on Facebook, share this as well. For those of you that are on Facebook, share this with your friends, because if you have a child, okay, if you're an athlete, if you're a business person, if you're an academic, whatever it is, the information that I discovered actually in the Talent Code is, for me, it's amazing, it's mind blowing, and it's super, super interesting. So please help me welcome Mr. Dan Coyle. Dan, thanks so much for joining us.
Hey, thanks for having me, Michael. It's fun to be with you. I'm
super excited. So, all right. We were talking a little bit earlier. We give everybody a list of questions. One of the questions is, how do you define success? And so let me just, I guess, lead in. I usually don't do this, but so I have an 11-year-old little girl, and I coach soccer. I'm not really a soccer guy. I'm more of a like a football guy. And I started Googling to try and find books and information out there so that I could become a better soccer coach, right?
Yep.
And I came across your book, The Talent Code, picked it up. I read it actually last year. I read it when I was vacationing in Aruba, and you tell some stories about an island off the kind of next to Aruba in your books, and it just. Man, it was just so amazing, the things that you talk about in there and all the different subjects you talk about. So success, though, like that original first question that I talk about, when you think about success, or when you think about successful people, I think a lot of people think people just got that it factor, right? I'm sure you probably heard that all the time. That, man, they were just born with it, or they were just given that God-given ability, or whatever it is. But your book, The Talent Code, kind of changes the way we should think about success and talent, right?
Well, it certainly changed the way I thought about it. The research, I spent 5 years visiting talent hotbeds, these places around the world where you get unusual concentrations of great chess players, great tennis players, brilliant mathematicians. And, these recur all over the place, right? We know that these places. But when you go to these places, you don't find genetic superstars. What you find is a process. What you find is that they're all doing the same thing. They're all practicing in the same way. And so for me, that sort of flipped the image of talent from, hey, it's this special set of genes you have to be born with, to it's this process where if you learn the process and really lock into how it works and connect it to your life and start living your life in alignment with that process, you can have a huge impact on your potential, which I think connects to the definition of success is kind of maximizing human potential. What could you do if you put all your energy in one direction and figure out the most efficient way to get from A to B to C to D as you improve your skills? And these places were so fascinating to me because they're aligned with the way our brain acquires skill. The way that they practice in a certain way. And that's what the book is about.
We're going to talk a little bit about this substance in the book, and for me, people always talk about the aha moments, and I was just talking to my producer, and I don't try not to ever make this about me because I love just learning from guys like you. But when you talk about, and we'll tease it a little bit, we'll talk about the substance that everybody has, and I knew this substance as well because I'm in the health and wellness world. It's really, really wild. We'll talk about that in a minute. But so, all right, let's talk about the God-given ability, right? And so, yep. Everyone, and you do a very good job of I guess for lack of a better term, not really like pissing anybody off of, faith-based people and things like that. So, you think of, when I think of like Michael Phelps, right? You think, okay, well, Michael Phelps is a genetic phenomenon. I talk about him in my books, and he's, when you look at his his wingspan, when you look at his feet, when you look at everything, you say, man, God just gave him the ability to be the best swimmer of all time. But that's really not the case, right?
It's not the whole picture. It's definitely not the whole picture. He had 2 sisters who were better than him, for one. When you talk about these different dimensions that talent has, motivational is a huge part of it. His sisters got kind of burned out. He didn't. His coach was incredibly smart about keeping his motivational fires stoked. Our genes give us these power plants, this physical, our bodies matter. The genes matter, no question. The way he's built helps. But when it comes down to making the maximum of his potential, what it comes down to is he was fortunate enough to be in this crummy little swim club in Baltimore, run by probably the most brilliant swim coach on the planet, this guy named Bob Bowman, who at a young age dialed in to what would keep young Michael working really, really hard at the edge of his ability. And there's a great story on how he did that. When Michael was really, really young, he won a big race. I think he was about 14 years old. He won a big international race, and his mom decorated his house just like any mom would do. Congratulations, Michael, all these banners outside. Bob Bowman came around beforehand, and he saw them, and he took them all down. And he said, look, this isn't our finish line. When you start celebrating this stuff, over-celebrating it, it naturally makes somebody take their foot off the accelerator. And he tried to create this environment. And this environment is what we have in all of these talent hotbeds. And it's not grim, it's not joyless, but it's a sense of a journey, and a sense of a journey that's propelled by a form of practice where you're constantly going to the absolute edge of your ability, where you're constantly failing, actually. That's the thing that Bob understands. When you're failing in technique, when you're failing in endurance, and getting into that edge and spending time on that edge is incredibly powerful for building skill and growing talent.
Yeah, and so when you talk about, the practice, in your book, The Talent Code, you talk about deep practice, and you'd mentioned the struggle. I had Les Brown on my podcast, the motivational speaker, and we actually were connected through Brian Buffini, which was great. And he talked about, in one of his quotes, and I quote him all the time now, and I should probably give him more credit for it, but he said, it's the struggle that creates life. And in your book, The Talent Code, and man, I hopefully you got a couple hours. No, I'm only kidding. But you talk about the struggle, and it's almost more important, or actually it is more important to struggle than not to struggle in order to be successful, not just in sports, pretty much in anything, right?
Way more. That's where your brain grows.
But it hurts, man. Doesn't it hurt? I didn't mean to cut you off, but it hurts, man. The struggle hurts.
It's horrible. It's painful. It's embarrassing. We're social beings. You know what I mean? It's really embarrassing. The best example of this is a story that I tell in the book of a girl named Clarissa who is part of this experiment practicing clarinet. And she plays 2 songs back to back. The first one, she plays kind of like any kid would play. She kind of plays the song from beginning to end. She makes mistakes, but she doesn't really notice those mistakes. She just kind of flows right through them, and she's kind of, in what I would call shallow practice. And then she practices in a different way. She leans into it. She makes the mistake, and then she feels the mistake. Like, you can see her getting bummed out every time, and she can feel the pain of her going, that's the wrong one. This is the right one. And her learning velocity, she was part of this experiment where they measured how much she learned. Her learning velocity goes up 10 times when she practices more deeply, when she leans into the mistake, when she gets into that emotional pain, that social emotional pain of struggling. Because the great irony of struggle is that so much of our practice in athletics, in business especially, is kind of designed around like preserving us from embarrassment, minimizing risk, minimizing struggle. Like, when somebody's struggling, there's so many teachers who say, oh, no, let's just move on. We'll work on that later, where they don't lean into that moment of struggle. And it's hugely ironic, because when you go to the talent hotbeds, those are the moments that are being celebrated, they're being generated, they're being designed. All of life is built around, in these hotbeds, generating this moment of struggle that little girl had with her clarinet, because that's what makes your brain grow. That's what makes your learning velocity go up. You can learn, I calculated, the Clarissa with the clarinet learned more in 10 minutes practicing that way than she would have learned in a month practicing the other way. So these moments of leverage, that pain that you feel is actually an indicator that you're doing it right, that you're learning. So to find, it's not And the key is not to sort of struggle wildly. Like, you don't want to be way out of your depth making a million mistakes. You want to be making around like 20 or 30% mistakes for every successful move. You want to be in this zone on the edge of your ability where you're constantly dialed into, okay, I missed by this much, but if I move this way, I can get it right. Those mistakes are our friend. Those mistakes are the things that guide us toward a solution.
It's as I'm listening to you, it's so hard. I was just talking to somebody about this. It's so hard to really be cognizant of that and to really think about, man, the struggle, again, creates life. But if you can learn that at an early age, and we're going to talk a lot about, futsal is one thing I definitely want to talk to you about. We're going to talk a lot about that struggle. But in a second, I also want to talk to you about the substance that I had mentioned. It kind of really edifies the saying, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, in just a second. Folks, we're on with New York Times bestselling author Dan Coyle. If you're listening right now and you're interested in what's going on, please, I'd just like to ask you to share this with your friends, your relatives, your neighbors. If you're listening right now live on Facebook, also please share it, because we're just getting started. I found this book, The Talent Code, about a year ago, and it's one of the best books I've read. I read books, like many people within my world, a lot, and I honestly, truly, I'm jealous, actually, Dan, of his writing skills, first of all, but the book itself just really brings full circle on why people are successful from a physiological standpoint. Like, scientifically, he really shows you how and why people become successful and also don't become successful, and it's just an amazing book. He also has another book coming out on January 30th called The Culture Code. It's available on Amazon. It's available on Books A Million. It's available on BarnesandNoble.com now for pre-order. I would highly suggest picking up that book as well. He's a very, very talented guy, and the book, The Talent Code, again, is one of my favorite books of all time. And Dan, in fact, I have given speeches. I think I told you. I don't know if I told you this. I've given speeches, and I gave a speech once, and I spent a half an hour talking about what I learned from your book and talking about this substance, that you talk about in your book. You spent a lot of time about this, and the substance is called myelin, right?
Yep, that's it. That's exactly right.
Now, I've heard of myelin for a couple different reasons, because I'm in the dietary supplement world, and one of our big products is a joint health supplement, and the Myelin Sheath is important as it relates to pain, right, with arthritis and rheumatoid arthritis and even some other autoimmune diseases. And when the Myelin Sheath starts to break down and starts to get holes in it, that's when your nerve endings become exposed and you start to have pain. But you talk about myelin in an amazing way that I had never thought about. And for me, again, it just was like, wow, man, it just makes total sense. Tell us a little bit about myelin, why it's important, and how all of us have it and how all of us can improve on it at any age. It's amazing.
And we're not the only ones who are amazed by this. A lot of the scientists who began to study myelin about 10 years ago were also amazed, because myelin is we've heard that term before, myelin sheath, like you described. It's the insulator. It's this fat insulator that goes around, sort of like electrical tape. It's like the electrical tape that goes around our nerves. Our nerves are wires, basically. That's how our brain is a collection of wires, and each of those wires is wrapped in myelin, and it looks just like electrical tape. Actually, it's layer, 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 layer. It goes from 5 layers deep to like 50 layers deep. And for many years, people just thought it was boring. It's just the electrical tape. Let's study the stuff inside the electrical tape. The wire is interesting. But it turns out that the myelin is also super interesting, because when you practice something, when you operate at the edge of your ability, when you fire a circuit, as you do when you make a tennis swing or solve an algebra problem, when you fire that circuit over and over again, the myelin around that circuit senses it and gets thicker. It adds another wrap and adds another wrap and adds another wrap, and it gets thicker and thicker. And as it gets thicker, it makes the velocity of the electricity within that circuit go faster and be more accurate. So you've got basically this fact that myelin is kind of like human broadband. It adds capacity to your brain circuitry. And of course, we know every skill exists inside the human brain. Everything that involves coordinating your body, everything that involves a thought or a feeling or an action, or being a great chess player or being a great radio host, it's all circuitry in your brain. So myelin is basically the way that we grow our circuitry through practice. You earn it. You earn a little more myelin by practicing. This is why practicing for thousands of hours is the common thing that is true across all complex cognitive skills. Nobody's in it after practicing for 100 hours. It takes thousands of hours of practice, 10,000, some have said. While that's just kind of a more general figure than a precise one. But it takes a long time to grow the myelin, to grow the broadband that lets you be super accurate, super fast, and able to execute really complex skills in a simple way. So that's what's happening when we're practice. We normally think about practice as being kind of like, it's like this drudge work, right? Like, I got to go to practice. I got to practice this. But what really, the research flips that a little bit on its head. It's this incredible opportunity. It's this growth. It's not just like, mopping the floor. It's not something you have to do just to sort of maintain. It's this incredible opportunity of growth and change and transformation that's happening with every additional rap that you earn around your circuitry.
What I love about it, too, by the way, you do an amazing job of just taking some pretty complex stuff and making it fairly simple for the average guy to understand. And it's so exciting. When I told you, I gave a speech, and I talked about my life and how when I read your book and understood this whole myelin thing, because the way I've grown up, a lot of people have grown up in difficult situations. People say, well, Mike, what makes you so different, right? And I started to think about, well, man, I just think differently than most people, and I've done things differently than a lot of the people that I grew up with. And when I think about where I'm at today and where I'm going to be in the future, a lot of that is because I'm just working my fucking ass off, right? And by the way, I'm getting my ass kicked all along the way too, and I always have. And the myelin though, the other interesting thing that the science that you talk about in the book is that we all have it for the most part, right? Unless there's really something, unless there's really something wrong with the person. But most of us have myelin, and here's the other great part about it: is it can grow at any age, right?
That's right. That's right. You can still grow it. It arrives. Young people grow it really fast, which is why in certain parts of the brain they can add skill very quickly. I mean, there's nobody who's playing in the Boston Symphony Orchestra who started playing violin when they were 20. You know what I mean? Those people don't exist because you add myelin to your brain in these layers, and when your brain is growing when you're young is this wonderful opportunity where your brain is growing really fast. But for anybody at any age, you can add that. You can add skill. You can earn myelin at any age. So it's very kind of democratic. It doesn't mean there's no differences in the way we add them or how fast we add them. Human brains are different. Genes do matter. But this is the core mechanism. It's almost like, what we've learned about physical fitness over the years. We used to think if you were, running a marathon was a crazy thing to do if you were like over 50 or so. And now it's like, no, actually just about anybody can train up to do some really remarkable things. And our brains are built kind of like our bodies are. When we stress our bodies, they get stronger, which is why the gym is really a helpful thing. It's kind of painful, but it's really powerful. And when you learn to operate your life more along those principles, like it's a gym where those moments of struggle and pain give you gain, the brain is really a hell of a muscle.
Yeah, it's just really awesome. Again, folks, if you're listening right now or if you're watching on Facebook Live or if you're watching later on YouTube, we're on with Dan Coyle. He is the author of The Talent Code. One of my favorite books of all time. I've read a ton of books. I absolutely love this book. I recommend it for anybody. He also has another book coming out called The Culture Code. It's due out January 30th. You can pre-order it now on Amazon. You can pre-order it on Books A Million, also on Barnes & Noble. If you'd like some more information about Dan as well, you can just go to Daniel Coyle. That's COYLE.com. He's also on Twitter at Daniel Coyle. Again, go back to when I originally found you. I was trying to find a book on how to be a better coach, and one of my fellow coaches is on Facebook Live right now, and so I find this book, The Talent Code, and I'm reading it, and my daughter's 11, and I really want her to be great. And then you talk about this sport did you discover it in Brazil? Like, is it because of you why it's here?
No, it was this guy that I met named Simon Clifford who really popularized it. But they've been playing in Brazil since the late 30s.
So let's talk about that. Let's talk about this sport that's in Brazil that resembles soccer, that really kind of has created some of the best soccer players ever. What is it, and why is it important?
Yeah, it's called Futebol do Salão, and shortened as futsal, and it resembles soccer if you put soccer in a phone booth and gave it amphetamines. It's It's fast. It's really small. It plays on a basketball court with a small ball, small center of gravity, difficult to control, 5-a-side. In soccer, you've got all this green space in normal conventional soccer. In football disallow, that space disappears because someone's guarding you like they guard you in basketball. So when you start playing it, you make a ton of mistakes. There's no like green space to run around and chase the ball, right? Someone's on you. So you make a ton of mistakes. The ball's small and hard to control. The goal is small and hard to control. Time is pressurized. Every decision you make, you have to anticipate and notice what's happening around you because you got no time. So it's this wonderful machine for pushing people from like shallow practice into deep practice where they're constantly on the edge of their ability. You touch the ball 40%, 400% more in football disallow, and most players in Brazil play nothing but this until they're like 12. So they get thousands of hours practicing in this game that is incredibly difficult, and pushes you right to the edge of your ability. And people wonder why Brazil produces so many great soccer players. I mean, the usual explanation for Brazil producing great soccer players is, well, it's warm and they love soccer. But, there's a lot of places that are warm and love soccer. Brazil is the place where the sport was invented, and they started getting great as a nation about 20 years after, actually about 10 years after the sport started to get popularized. So there were coaches from the UK and other places that said, hey, maybe this is a key. And they brought a bunch of those balls home, and they started training people in this game. And the kids are touching the ball 4% more. There's way more pressure, way more. And these kids get really good really fast. And it's not magic. It's not genes. It's the design of the space in which they're giving effort. It's the space. It's the space and the practice, which tips them toward deep practice. Their brains are growing faster. Their bodies are able to move because their circuitry is faster and better because of this game. So it's this wonderful metaphor, and it makes you wonder when you see the success that Brazil and other nations now have had using this sport. It makes you wonder, okay, where else? What's my version of that in my job? How do I do that? And sure enough, when you start to look around and you look at, I came across some stock traders recently, and they had basically invented their version of futsal. They had been able to compress a day's trading into like an hour, where they were forced to make all these decisions in this kind of simulator environment, almost like a flight simulator with a stock market, where they forced themselves to make all these snap decisions, and they'd go back and they'd review their performance and see where they could improve. So there's ways of doing that in whatever domain you're in, to just compress the space, make yourself make more decisions, more on the edge of your ability, and generate more learning.
Yeah, and also the ball itself too. Like you said, it's smaller, and the ball is heavier too, right? And so it helps more even develop the actual muscles themselves within their feet, right?
That's right. You can feel that ball more. I mean, it's an absolute, and it's also really, really fun. That's another factor. It's a very joyful, fun, freewheeling game. So yeah, it is. It's absolutely wonderful.
Yeah, we actually we have it here in my town. My daughter plays indoor too. We're gonna probably might get into it this year. Just the timing issue hasn't worked out for us. But if you are a soccer parent right now, you're listening and watching. Definitely check out futsal. It's everywhere, and it's really, really wild. Again, Dan spends a lot of time talking about it in his book. In fact, there are entire soccer leagues that I know of here, even in Massachusetts, that their underlying principles all start with futsal, because what Dan is talking about. It has created some of the best soccer players, out of they've all come out of Brazil. So. Let's talk about baseball again. And by the way, so again, just before, I don't want people to misinterpret, like, this isn't a whole sports thing, and like Dan had kind of talked about it. These principles, right, Dan, they apply to everything, okay? But I'm fascinated by the whole sports aspect of it, because that's how I found it. But I mean, he talks about, you talk about chess, obviously you talk about tennis, you talk about business. So these principles apply really for everything. But so when I was reading this, I was in Aruba, and I forget the name of the island now. There's this other small island off the coast of near Aruba. It's not the Dominican, where they produce a lot of great baseball players. And the same thing is like almost soccer, or even when you talk about that small town in Russia where it's not very beautiful, and there's not a lot of equipment, and but they're producing these amazing baseball players. Tell us a little bit about that area, and then also I want you, if you can, because we go from Boston, Manny Ramirez. I want you to tell us a little bit about Manny Ramirez as well. But tell us about that town specifically and why they're producing great baseball players.
It's an island called Curacao. It's really, really a tiny place, but it produces a ton of big league players. Didi Gregorius, Andrew Jones, a bunch of guys are from there. So the question is why. When you dig into that, you can actually isolate the moment when it happened. And they had what they've got is one guy got out of that island and hit a home run for the Yankees. It was Andrew Jones in the World Series. That moment lit up baseball in that tiny place. When that kid succeeded, all the kids got this amazing signal in their windshield, which was like, hey, the guy down the street that we all know did it. Why can't we? And so the Little League program took off like a rocket, and now they're out there competing in the Little League World Series every year. They do this amazing thing there that's really interesting too, where it's, in our American world, I think we tend to divide kids up into groups, and the 12-year-olds are over here, and the 13-year-olds are over here, and the 14-year-olds are over here, and all those teams are kind of siloed. And in a place like Curacao, they're all together. I saw a Little League practice with like 90 kids, and I've coached Little League in the past, and it's hard to have 20,
Right.
But what they do is they pair the kids up, and you'll have the 14-year-old teaching the 12-year-old, and the 10-year-old is teaching the 8-year-old. And that moment where those kids are looking at who they want to become, those little kids are looking up and saying, that's who I'm going to be. They're really good at creating this motivational environment and filling the windshield with these really vivid images of who you want to become. And that's what ignites this, because it's hard. Like you talked about before, it's hard to struggle. It takes a big fuel tank to do that. And what Curacao is so great at is filling that fuel tank, constantly filling that fuel tank with the rocket fuel that it takes to keep practicing deeply.
Yeah, I love it. And is that so in your book? So again, the first question I would like to ask people again is, how do we define success? And your whole book does a great job of actually defining success for everybody and on why people are successful at whatever it is they do. So, we always hear, okay, well, again, that guy has the it factor, or he was just born with it, or whatever. And we know that that's, to a certain degree, that's not really the whole story. But then I think what you're getting at was this other story. Andrew Jones hits a home run in the World Series. Curacao, little-known island, all of a sudden starts producing Major League Baseball players. Is that the ignition moment for those kids? Because you talk about that as well, and as far as really that spark for anybody and whatever it is that they really also need in order to be successful. Is that what you're talking about?
That's exactly right. I mean, our motivation, we understand, you come from a health perspective. We understand how our circulatory system works. We understand how our immune system works to a certain extent. This is how our motivational system works. When you stare at an image of your future self, it's somebody that you want to become. You don't just admire them. You know what I mean? But your identity is linked to them. There's all number of cool psychological experiments that show this. When you lock in and stare at somebody you want to become, it unlocks a huge amount of psychological energy that can drive you toward that goal if you have the right practice environment. And it becomes this virtuous spiral in a place like Brazil. One kid succeeds, pretty soon the next time there's 3 kids, and then there's 8 kids, and then there's 100 kids, and it keeps growing. Each of these talent hotbeds follows that same pattern where one breaks through, and that ignites all the others. And if you have that practice environment in place, you can create a heck of a lot of talent.
Yeah, Earl Nightingale in the original Strangest Secret, he said the strangest secret is you become what you think about, right? And there's just so much. It's such a powerful thing. When you just described that. I wrote down your future self. And that ignition moment too, I think a lot of people, and you also talk about this, that ignition moment, it's not fate, right? Like a lot of times, or not, almost all of the times, that ignition moment is something that was, essentially kind of manufactured as well in a way that where by the coaches, right, or by the other people that are in your environment. And I think about, and hopefully I'm right with this, but I think about, I was talking with a friend of mine, and his son is just a rock star hockey player, right? And we were talking a lot about this whole thing, and I was talking about, the ignition moment. And I said, for sometimes kids, the ignition moment could be when you walk into the garden and you see the Bruins for the first time, right? You know, like as a parent, I think about, man, I haven't brought my daughter to a professional soccer game yet, but when, you know, I plan on it, you know, this season, and I'm like saying to myself, man, you know, is that the ignition moment? Like, how do you, is there any way to tell? Or is, because I'm thinking more of it from as a parent side, like, so you have a young athlete, right? You know, whatever sport, you know, whatever. So you know, the other part is, you know, you have a student who wants to go to college, right? And so you bring them to colleges. Is it, as parents, should we always try and create as many ignition moments as possible because we're not really quite sure what will click? Is that sound advice?
I think that's very sound advice. And create, you know, it's kind of like, it's when lightning strikes, but you can't control when that lightning's going to strike, but you can seed the clouds a little bit, you know, and that's what these are, where you're constantly putting things in the windshield. And the thing to pay attention to as a parent is, what does your kid stare at? Like, what do they what can they not look away from? You know, what are they locked in on? Those are moments where you want to pay deep attention and say, okay, that's an area where we can explore some more. What's the next thing to put in their windshield? And that idea of the windshield is a really powerful one, you know, just to continue to fill it. You see that phenomenon even with, like, in music groups, you know, like, for example, when you look into the question of who the most talented in these big family groups, like the Jacksons or the Osmonds, I mean, who's the most talented Jackson? You know, it's not Tito, right? And that's not his fault. He just wasn't lucky enough to be the youngest, right? Michael's the youngest. He grew up staring at these older guys who he wanted to become. So he had so much ignition, right? Every single day, you look at an example of your future self. So trying to, as a parent, just find those examples. And the other thing I'd say as a parent is kind of not to talk too much around these moments. There's a lot of, you know, modern parenting always can sometimes end up where you're interrogating your kids. You know, they go to a ballet class, and they get home and you start asking them, how'd it go? What'd you think? Did you like it? Did you like the teacher? Did you like the exercise? Did you like the music? And next thing the signal you're sending with that is sort of like, that's not your space, that's mine. You're kind of taking over for them, right? And then pretty soon they're just reacting by saying, yeah, I don't know, I didn't like it. But just to sort of, as a parent, just be quiet and let it be, and let them have the experience, and just let their behavior tell you what's going on. Don't ask them to express it. If they get excited and like to wear those ballet shoes, that's awesome. Keep doing it. And if they are disconnected, then keep looking for the next thing.
Yeah, I think about, you know, when the future self, and I hope I'm not mixing up the books, because I've read another great book called How Children Succeed, and I think you talk about KIP in the Town Code, right?
Yep. Yep.
And so in the KIP is the Knowledge is Power program. I actually spoke at one here in Lynn, and they're doing some great things. They're a great school for most of them are in the inner cities, and one of the things that they do, and a lot of these other great kind of progressive schools, is they are having these kids try and see what their future self looks like by bringing 10-year-olds to colleges. I mean, I thought that was pretty awesome.
Isn't that genius? That is just, to me, that is just dead on genius, you know. And you take them there, and they start to see that, and especially from an inner city community where they might not have that opportunity. You know, when I was researching the talent code, I met this kid who was nobody in his family had ever gone to college. He was in the 4th grade. His name was Daniel, and he said he had just gotten back from visiting. I think he visited Stanford and Berkeley. This was a school out in San Francisco, and I'm like, so, you know, what do you think about for your future? I asked him some general question, and he goes, you know, I like Stanford, but I'm more of a Berkeley guy.
That's right. I remember. I'm smiling because I remember you telling the story. Right.
It's unbelievable. I mean, what a transformation by connecting the dots. Just sort of connecting the dots, like, hey, this is out there, and this could be you, and you know, you might meet somebody from KIP who's at that school now. And that, I think that's a function that, you know, parents and coaches can play. Kind of connecting the dots, trying to, you know, spin the tape forward a little bit, look forward and say, where are you headed? How can I expose them to an image of their future self?
And these kids, too, when we're talking about the Knowledge is Power program, the KIP school, charter schools, there's a bunch of them, you know, all over the country like it. But what I love about that story and pretty much all the stories in your book is, as parents, we're always worried about our kids' future, and and we're all come from different socioeconomic backgrounds, but there's essentially nothing that's going to prevent a parent, I don't care, where you grew up, from taking your child, your 10-year-old, to a university and just walking around the campus, right? Because I didn't have that, but my mother, did go to community college, and I remember her, I remember going to my mother's graduation, growing up in the projects with nothing, and my mother graduated with honors. It was a community school. She graduated straight A's, but I remember that, and you never really know whether or not, what your ignition moment is, but as a parent, it's such powerful advice, man, right? Like you can again, like I talked about, almost manufacture these moments for your children, but don't say, hey, did you just have your ignition moment? But give them those experiences, right?
Right.
Because we're so busy. I think as parents, there are so many parents that are so busy, man, that like, and it's hard, right? If you're working 2 jobs and you're barely making ends meet, and you're trying to be a good mom, dad, put food on the table and dinner and all these other things, that you're just kind of living your life. But there are so many things that you can do that just to give them that additional experience that isn't going to cost really anything, that could be that ignition moment that could ultimately lead them on the life that they're ultimately going to live.
That's right. And the cool thing about understanding some of the science is that it can mellow you out as a parent. And my wife and I definitely experienced this, where it's like, hey, when you understand that, like, your kid, it really is important that they stare at it and that they have some base relationship with it. And you can sort of not be shuttling to every single lesson and exercise out there. You find the 2 or 3 that they're really into and kind of stick with those, and keep experimenting. But it stops the kind of helter-skelter craziness that can sometimes infect modern parenting.
So I want to I want to kind of go back to the deep practice thing a little bit and ask you about this deep practice phenomenon, so to speak, in theory, and as it relates to young kids in just a moment. Folks, if you're watching right now, or if you're listening, if you're watching on Facebook Live, please share this. If you're listening on YouTube later on, or even listening on the podcast, please share if you feel as though that it's adding value. I feel like this is some good information. I'm super excited because, again, we're on with Dan Coyle. Is the author of The Talent Code. He's written actually several different books, New York Times bestselling author. He has a book coming out called The Culture Code. It's available everywhere for pre-order. You can find it on Amazon. You can find it on Books A Million. You can find it on BNN.com, BarnesandNoble.com. You can also find some information about Dan at DanielCoyle.com. You can find him on Twitter at Daniel Coyle. So this deep practice thing, right? As a coach of U12 girls, and who's really not really a professional coach, right? At least I don't think I am. I do really think a lot about those moments that I'm having with these kids, and I by the way, I just love it. It's like my favorite hour of the week. But this deep practice thing, when is it really important to kind of instill that in, adolescent girls and boys? Is there? How do you know that you're maybe pushing them too far? And also the other part, I guess, the follow up to that is okay. So let's say you back off. I mean, can they still have the same benefit of deep practice at 9, 10 years old as they would when they're 13, 14?
Totally. Because the thing about deep practice is it's not about pushing to exhaustion and total failure all the time, right? It's about being in the sweet spot where stuff is challenging, but it's obsessively challenging. The thing that you don't want to have in this, you want to basically maximize. A good concept is the word reach. You want to maximize, as a good coach, the reaches per minute. How many times in a minute does a player make a really hyper-aware, difficult move, whether they make it or not, but they're making this tough move. And the way good coaches do that is that they'll compress the space, they'll add a ball, they'll increase the challenge. They're constantly like titrating the environment to get people to that learning edge. And what you see with soccer practice a lot is you see authoritarian coaches telling everybody to get into a line, and they line up and they kick the ball, and then one at a time they go through spotlighting each individual act, which is a terrible way to run practice. Actually, your reaches per minute is way down. So good coaches spend almost as much time designing practice as they do running practice. John Wooden did this at UCLA. He spent an hour, for every hour of practice, he spent an hour in preparation. And that's not a bad place to start, actually, from a coach. And there's a ton of good resources out there. For soccer in particular, I'd point you toward Doug Lemov's work in coaching, Lemov. He posts a lot of great video of good soccer coaches in action, and he highlights what they do well, how they frame the expectations for practice, how they send signals during practice without interrupting it, while keeping the flow going, where you're not, the typical authoritarian coach would have them line up, and then if somebody makes a mistake, blows a whistle, walks in and corrects them. And it's about as backward in terms of creating skill as you could possibly get. So look at some of those resources, find ways to maximize the reaches, and that can happen at the youngest age. It can happen at the oldest age.
So as a good coach, as a parent, you're just going to have to gauge it really on a kind of a case-by-case basis on really how far that reaches and how many times you're really kind of pushing them to that level. Is that really kind of the answer?
That is. And you want to also make sure that it's very game-like.
Right.
Cones are great, but you never compete against cones. So finding ways to replicate it, to make it as game-like as possible, so that the players can really dial into that and then transfer what happens on the practice field onto the game.
I want to. You said you have a little bit more time because I'm already keeping you 45. Yep. All right, awesome. Because I'm not gonna. I promise I won't go like 2 hours, although I could with you. So I want to get into the culture code in a minute and how that book came about, and maybe even a little bit about the writing process, because your writing skills are just amazing. Let's talk about some of the greats, like some of the great athletes that you've talked about in your book. Let's talk about Manny Ramirez. And you describe him as like many people here from Boston would think he was beloved here, but a lot of people thought he was just kind of flaky and just kind of like I just show up and I swing the bat. But tell us about his work ethic and maybe some others. Like I think about I think you talked about like Kobe Bryant, in some of these other great professional athletes, and really what has made them great. And we've already talked about it. It's not they're just God-given genes. It's other things. Tell us first. Let's tell us the Manny Ramirez story.
Yeah, man. I mean, it's interesting. The pattern that you have with a lot of greats is that you end up, when you look at them from far away, you notice things that stand out. You notice their goofy hair. You notice their eccentricities. You notice their sort of social habits. And Manny Ramirez is a very funny, eccentric, different guy in a lot of ways. It's not everybody who will like take a bathroom break in the middle of a game at Fenway Park. Actually, my good friend Todd Balfe, who lives in Beverly, wrote a kid's book called Manny Being Manny.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
All right, let's check that out.
If you like Manny, you would love this book because because he's kind of a character from a kid's book. You know what I mean? Like,
right.
Hair and everything. But when you actually, if anybody spent time with him in the batting cage, he was as disciplined, as organized. He had this drill that people still talk about in Cleveland, where he would have a number. He'd have his coaches write a number on the ball, right, number 1 through 9, and they would whip it by at 80 miles an hour off a batting machine, and he would try to identify what number that was. Nobody else did that. Nobody else did that. It wasn't that he had great eyes. It was that he was practicing that skill of pitch recognition, which was a big deal. He knew his swing incredibly well. He had a very precise practice routine that he was addicted to. He was a good player. He was an even better practicer. You always see that pattern, too. You notice the eccentricity, but when you scratch the surface, what you get underneath is somebody who's got a system for operating at the edge of their ability. Kobe, similar sort of thing, very similar story. His practice is more legendary. He's, how many thousands of shots he has to make. When he calls his trainer to meet at 4 at the gym, Kobe, they once got in a sort of a miscommunication because Kobe meant 4 a.m. He went to the gym at 4 a.m. to shoot 1,000 shots. He shot 1,000 shots every day. 1,000 shots is a lot of shots.
Right.
He had this elaborate, very personalized routine that he owned. These guys who achieved at that certain level, the coach is between their ears. They don't have a separate coach saying, hey, Kobe, I think you should go shoot 1,000 shots today, because they own that process themselves. And they're so tuned in to their day-to-day work ethic. It's inspiring and remarkable to be around. And you see that all the time. You see that with musicians. You see that with Jimi Hendrix. You see that with the Beatles. The attention to craft that they have. Once you sort of push away the kind of sparkly stuff on the outside, what you find usually is somebody who's a craftsperson and who cares about that craft and who has built their life around that craft. And that's what really the inspiring part of it is.
All right, so here's the tough question. Where does it come from? Why does Kobe Bryant go in and shoot 1,000 shots? Why does Manny Ramirez do what he did? And why do the greats do what they do? I mean, do you have the answer?
It's a combination of things. I would say that they're hugely ignited, but that ignition has always gets sort of relit, right? Ignition isn't a one-time deal. I would say that early on, both of those guys got a really clear idea of who they wanted to be, and they were in really, really good environments, and they both have obsessive personalities. Like, there's something about this, and it's not always pretty. Like, when you dig down into highly successful people's psyche, what you find is not pretty. What you find is often really some aggression, maybe some anger. We see that with a Michael Jordan. You see that with a Bill Russell. It's not happy-go-lucky. So there's something in their psyche. Actually, you find a lot of them have got like father issues or they're orphans. There's a tremendous amount of success related to losing a parent at an early age, because that gives you a signal that this world is not a safe place.
You talk about that in the book.
It's in the book. The list. If you look at the people who are orphaned who've gone on to achieve greatness in any field, whether it's politics or writing, it is stunning to see how much that improves the odds, so to speak, of someone becoming great. So what's deep down in there can be dark at times, but it gets funneled into good habits. And I would say that's what makes those guys different, is that they get ignited at a young age. They're driven by something in their past usually, and they get themselves in kind of a micro environment that builds those habits and continues to build those habits. And it's that relentlessness that's driving it. The relentlessness plus habits plus time is a pretty good. And the other element that these guys have is really resilience and grit. They perceive setbacks as opportunities. You push them down and they push back. And so there's that, very deep in their psyche as well.
And that you get pushed down, you push down and you get back up. And we always, I posted a meme today essentially on Instagram with Winston Churchill, said if you're gonna go to hell, you might as well go all the way through it, or something along those lines, right? And so and if you get pushed down or never quit, but it is. I think a lot of people don't understand. That's something, I think for the most part, again, unless there's something really deep down in your psyche that we haven't really been able to psychoanalyze, that is something that you have to work at, right? It's like the deep practice. Like if you want to be great, you have to understand that you're going to get knocked down, and you have to remind yourself that you have to get up, right?
That's right. And that's like a muscle that grows with time. You get up with little things and bigger things and bigger things. And there's a wonderful book, which I'm sure you're aware of, Grit by Angela Duckworth, that really gets into the fact that, grit is learned. Grit is not something you're necessarily, maybe we're all born with it to a certain extent, but as it applies in our lives as adults, as kids, it's really something that we learn. And you can design sort of a culture and environment to maximize the learning of grit.
Right. Right, yeah, I love it. So, all right, so tell us about the Culture Code, why it's important, in some of the kind of the key principles in this book, because you've written several great books. Why'd you write this one? Why is it important, and what are we going to learn?
Yeah, it got started. I was out at this really incredible tennis club, this tennis hotbed in Russia called Spartak. It was one of the places I started when I reported the Talent Code, where all these incredible players were coming. And there was a little girl who had walked into the club, and it was her first day there, and the teacher noticed her coming in and walked over to the little girl and welcomed her, and then said, "Hey, I want you to do something for me." And she said, she held out a tennis ball, and she said, "I want you to catch this tennis ball." And so she threw the tennis ball, and the little girl caught it. And it took like 5 seconds. But you could see the impact it had. Like, this little girl went from being a scared outsider to being a very comfortable, connected person in this community. And for me, that moment really resonated with these cultures I was encountering in these talent hotbeds. There's something you feel in a successful group, whether that's your favorite restaurant or a great school or a great business or a great entertainment company or a great championship locker room. You feel it. You feel it in the air. It's a sense of connectedness, a sense of synchronicity, a sense of cohesion, a sense of purpose. And so I kept feeling that in these places that I would visit. And so the book was my exploration to answer, what's that made of? How do we get that? How do we get more of that? Because it's not magic. It feels like magic, right? When you're in a place like that and everybody's in sync and everybody's moving the same direction and they're cooperating without saying a word and they're moving through problems like fish moving through a coral reef, like all at once, just threading their way through, that is a beautiful thing to watch. But that is not, it feels like magic, but it's not magic. It's really the product. As I visited these places, I ended up visiting Pixar, San Antonio Spurs, Navy SEAL Team 6, a company called IDEO, this amazing design company, this Serbian bunch of jewel thieves, all these groups that are super successful, super connected, and they're all the same group. They all do the same stuff. They do the same process, which is they create safety. They create safety. They build safety. They let each other know they're connected, and they show that connection constantly. And they show each other that they share a future. So they're constantly letting each other know that they're connected. And the second thing they do is they share vulnerability. They're really vulnerable with each other. They really are open about their weaknesses, so that they can get strong together. If you lie about your weakness, if you cover it up, you can't cooperate well, right? So these places all have habits and mechanisms through which they can have a lot of candor and tell each other the truth.
Oh,
kind of these awkward conversations, right? But they're true. And so they connect and then they can do a better job together. And then the third thing they do is they establish purpose, and they basically put all these GPS signals in the environment to let people know where they're going and why they're going there. So it's that combination of like they connect on safety, they share vulnerability, and then they drive toward a purpose. And that's what the book's about. It's about this 3-step process that is the same for any group that wants to be highly cohesive, highly purposeful, and really successful.
Oh, I can't wait to read that, man. It sounds awesome.
Wow. I'm curious to have you read it.
All right, so I heard a bunch of stuff in there, and I can't wait to read it. But the one question I had, Pixar is just amazing just to be able to be there, and that's, Steve Jobs' bio is great, and what they've done over there is just amazing. But so Serbian jewel thieves. How does that happen? I mean, I love bank. I mean, warm-blooded American male. We love bank robbery movies. We love, jewel heist movies.
Yep.
How do you connect with Serbian jewel thieves without getting? I mean, how does that happen? I mean, do you have somebody that comes to you and says, "Look, I got these Serbian jewel thieves, and they have this great culture, and we want you to talk about." How does that happen? So please tell me how that. Maybe you can't, but to me, that part is just like wild.
Yeah, no, I had the assistance of a brilliant documentary filmmaker who had gone really deep with them, and that was incredibly helpful. So. With the help of her introduction, they were able to, I was able to learn a lot about how they functioned, and like anything else, they have a process, they have a system, and it really works. Yeah,
it's awesome too what you said, the process and the system. When I'm able to talk to people like you, for me, it's just like getting my PhD in business or marketing or whatever. And one of the things that I've learned throughout the years, right, is what you just said. The process or the system. Every successful person, business in the world has a process and has a system, and it's uniform, right? And they follow it, and they don't aberrate from it. And if they do, they have maybe a backup, like, hey, if this happens, then the system tells us to go this way. And if this happens, then the system tells us to go this way. But they have a system, right?
Right. That's right. It's not, that is no accident.
Yeah, I love it. Well, man, I tell you, I know you're busy, and I know you're doing all these things, and I'm super, super excited for the Talent Code. I want to, thank you so much for spending the time, with us and with our viewers and listeners. Folks, again, if you've been watching or listening right now, we've been on with Dan Coyle. He's the author of The Talent Code. Again, one of my favorite books of all time. I can't wait to read The Culture Code. I probably should have asked you for an advanced reader's copy. I'm going to ask you for that when we get offline anyway. But so his latest book, you heard him talk a little bit about it. It's called The Culture Code. It's due out January 30th. You can pre-order it now on Amazon, Books A Million, Barnes & Noble, even independent bookstores. And as an author, just so you guys know, I know how important that is to go out and pre-order a book now. And so go ahead and please, check it out. If you want some more information about Dan, you can just go to danielcoyle.com. I know that he does speaking gigs, here and there. He's a busy guy, but you can check out his information, maybe fill out the form there if you're a business and you're looking to maybe have him come speak to your employees. I know that he does that. Also, you can find him on Twitter. It's at Daniel Coyle. And again, check out his books. Just Google them. Go to Amazon. Go to Books A Million. Go to Barnes and Noble. And again, if you liked this, if you felt as though that the Alden Report added value, if you felt as though that the information here could help somebody out, I'd ask that you share it, review it, rate it, do all that stuff that you're supposed to do on social media. I never ask for it, even though my first book was titled "Ask More, Get More." I'd like to ask that you do that because I feel as though, for me, in my own selfish interests, that this added value, at least to me. So again, my name is Michael Alden. We've been on with Dan Coyle.